Okay, all right.
My name's Jean Peters. I'm with Wood County Indivisible. And I want to thank you all for attending this Speak Out and Rally tonight. I know it's a hot evening, but we know people are going through a lot worse than this heat we're facing tonight.
Yep.
And I want to thank all of our speakers who've traveled from as far as Morgantown and Charleston to be here tonight. You'll have the opportunity to listen and learn from Joseph Cohen, who's the Executive Director of the ACLU West Virginia, Reverend Dr. Shonda Hine, who is an expert in childhood trauma, Reverend Janice Hill with First Christian Church, and our congressional candidate, Kendra Forshea. The last few weeks have been pretty bruising for those of us who keep a watch on democracy. We've seen the deterioration of our country's norms and our collective humanity to a degree that many of us may not have anticipated. And like me, you may be sensing that we're entering a very dark chapter of our history. But together, we've been fighting for over a year and a half now. And we've been using all the tools at our disposal to fight back against the darkness that seems to be descending on our nation. This is no time for us to give up, because we know that we have a responsibility to shine a light on the policies and actions of this administration that do not represent our shared American values, but rather the small-mindedness of nativism, racism, and fear. So it's time for us to pick those lights up again. The crisis that this administration has created for asylum-seeking families at our southern border cannot be ignored. It cannot be kept out of view, and we cannot be silent. It is our responsibility as citizens and as human beings to speak out. As Martin Luther King Jr. once said, our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter. These people who have left behind everything they knew to find safety for themselves and their families matter. These mothers, these fathers, their children matter. And our decency matters. Our common humanity and belief in a country that can be better than this matters. We all know that Americans have been complicit in atrocities in our past, but I hope you, like me, believe that you would not have stood silent as our fellow citizens were placed in internment camps in World War II. And I hope that, like me, you understand that if you're asking yourself today what you would have done as Hitler rose to power, whatever you're doing today is what you would have done then. So please, resist the efforts of this administration to demonize and dehumanize brown-skinned people seeking asylum. Remember that injustice to one is injustice to all. And call Capito and Manchin and McKinley every day and demand that they actually do reunite these families and develop a sane, kind, and humane immigration policy. Dare to speak out when your neighbors and family talk of migrants as if they are other than us and less deserving of the dignity that is our common birthright. Speak, write, show up, and act. Believe that every act you take, every call you make has import. The world is watching, and history will write of these days, and what they write depends on you and I and every other ordinary citizen who dares to say, "Not in my name." So keep shining your light on the injustices and inhumanity of this administration so that all of our lights together may form a mighty spotlight. Please don't stop. I'm counting on you, and so are others. I'm going to turn over the mic right now to Joseph Cohen, who is the Executive Director of ACLU West Virginia.
Hi, everybody. So glad to be here with you today. As Jean said, I'm Joseph Cohen, the Executive Director of the American Civil Liberties Union of West Virginia. We're a nonpartisan organization, and our mission is to protect and expand civil liberties for everybody, citizen or non-citizen in West Virginia. A major focus of our work is to extend the promise of the Bill of Rights to those groups who have traditionally been denied its protections. And we think that in the year 2018, in Parkersburg, West Virginia, in the United States of America, that mission is as relevant and important as it has been at any point in our history. I stand here today with a mixture of shame and pride. I have shame in the actions that our government has taken in our names. These are actions in our names. They're actions, it's our government, and in a democracy that means you and I are the ones taking this action. I have shame in our treatment of children and families, and shame in the reaction to those who come to our shores in need. But at the same time, I feel pride. Pride in the millions of people who have stood up to this outrageous treatment of our immigrant brothers and sisters. Pride in the hope that we're ready to fight for a better future. And I have pride to be here that all of you are here with me today. I'm so proud to be here with you. Now our country, so Jean asked me to talk about the background that we're dealing with this particular crisis that we're seeing on at our border, where we are, and sort of just a general background on immigration in America. And there is a professor here today, so maybe I'm not the best person to do this, but I'm going to try to give you some basis, because there's so many misnomers out there regarding immigration. And one thing we have to start with, I think, is a recognition that for hundreds and hundreds of years in this country, prior to its founding, we have this history of dehumanizing people of color and taking their children. You know, our entire economy was built up on the system of human chattel, and children were taken from people of color. Our First Nations were destroyed by the kidnapping of Native children and putting them in orphanages. And families were destroyed, Japanese American families were destroyed during World War II. So this is not a new phenomenon in America. It's the same thing with a different day, at a different time, and a different group being targeted. Now at the outset, whenever I talk to folks about immigration, there are a few things that I like to make sure that everyone is aware of. There's a lot of mistaken information out there, but the first thing I always tell people is, it is not a crime in the United States of America to be present in our land without proper documentation. I repeat that. It is not a crime to be here without proper documentation. It is not a misdemeanor. It is not a felony. It is not a crime. It is merely a civil violation, something akin to a parking ticket, but it is not a crime. And I'll say that usually has a positive impact when I speak to undocumented crowds and groups who are undocumented. But that also means that they don't have certain protections. They don't have the right to an attorney if they're too poor to afford an attorney in immigration deportation proceedings. But it is important that we all recognize that being here without proper documentation is not a crime. The second thing that I always tell people is, it is unlawful to cross a border without proper documentation or without in the improper way. However, for the first offense, crossing the border without proper documentation is merely a misdemeanor. So it's sort of like public intoxication or vandalism. And if people are criminally charged with unlawfully crossing a border, which is very rare, or historically has been very rare, the traditional punishment is 2 nights in jail. Okay? Third thing I always want to make sure people know is that the government does not have to prosecute every criminal violation that takes place in the United States. The government does not have to take action against every non-criminal violation that is a civil violation, such as having improper documentation. The government does not have to seek that everyone sit in jail while awaiting trial or awaiting hearing. It doesn't make sense, for example, to criminally prosecute everyone who jaywalks. It doesn't make sense, and we don't do it. And in the immigration context, it doesn't make sense to charge every single person with the misdemeanor crime of improper entry. And historically, the government has not done so. It's a huge waste of government resources, and it's an ineffective way to keep our country safe. Likewise, it doesn't make sense to detain every single person who is subject to deportation. But that's the scenario we're in right now. That's what's happening right now. The fourth thing that I think people need to know off the bat is that to seek asylum in the United States, someone has to be physically present on U.S. soil. You have to be within the borders of the United States before you can request asylum. The so-called proper way to do that is by entering through a designated port entry somewhere. You land in New York, and that's a port entry, and then immediately seek out a Customs and Border Protection agent and say that you're seeking asylum. However, on our southern border, people are being turned away before they get to the border entry point. so people who are trying to seek asylum. So what they have to do instead is they enter at a non-authorized border entry point, and then they immediately seek out Customs and Border Protection and request asylum. Technically, doing so is a misdemeanor. You know, they've crossed the border at an unauthorized entry. But this is a very technical violation in this case because they're trying to do something legal and they're trying to do something appropriate that's protected by international law and our Constitution, but they can't do it without avoiding the border entry point. So those are the main points that I always make sure that people understand, because it really can change someone's opinion on the vast array of immigration attacks we're seeing across the country. But as he has done for so many other issues, the president has manufactured a crisis in order to gain some perceived negotiating advantage. That's what this is all about. In order to get his ridiculous wall, the president is using real people's lives. He's using children. He's using babies as leverage. He's separated babies from their parents, put young children in cages. He has dehumanized immigrants. He's called them animals, and now he puts them in kennels. I want to tell you about one of our clients. We call her Ms. L for anonymity purposes. Ms. L and her daughter escaped from the Democratic Republic of Congo, where they faced almost certain death. They arrived at the port of entry in San Diego and immediately presented themselves to border patrol agents and requested asylum. They didn't break the law. They weren't accused of breaking the law. They did everything that the law said they were supposed to do to request asylum. And for some reason, 4 days after they arrived in San Diego, the government put Ms. L in the Oda Mesa Detention Center. And she could hear in the next room her 7-year-old daughter's screams. She had no idea what they were doing with her daughter. No one spoke her language. No one spoke her daughter's language. They never told her where they were taking her, how long she wouldn't see her daughter. They took Mrs. L's daughter to Chicago, thousands of miles away from Ms. L. She knew nobody there. She had no one she loved, but her mother was sitting in the Oda Mesa Detention Center while they, for some reason, examined her claim of asylum. In the first 4 months of their separation, prior to the ACLU getting involved in suing in the case, Ms. L had only been able to talk to her daughter 6 times on the telephone. They'd never seen each other face to face. They'd never seen each other through a computer link or any other way. Let me be clear. This is torture. We are torturing this little girl and her mother. A mother and a daughter who have escaped persecution and violence came to our country, followed all of our laws, and then we subjected them to torture. Why did we do that? Why did we do that? For leverage, to be used by the president to get his ridiculous wall. Eventually, our lawsuit was able to get Ms. L and her daughter reunited. However, we have a class action lawsuit that's ongoing that we're representing all separated families across the country. And that's because, of course, our client, Ms. L, is not alone. Our government has taken thousands of children from their parents over the past few months. The damage is unthinkable. The dark horrors of our government's policies have started to emerge. Marco Antonio Muñez. He's a Honduran father who killed himself after being separated from his wife and child. 3 siblings who were taken from their parents were told that they were not allowed to hug one another while in a government facility. And parents who were deported months ago are still waiting the United States to return their baby. Well, last week, bowing to mounting pressure, the president issued an executive order which purports to end family separation. I remind you, this is a mess entirely of his own making. But even the most casual observer at this point must recognize that the administration has zero credibility when it comes to doing right by immigrant communities. We must remain vigilant and relentless in our pursuit of justice for all of these families. Tellingly, Donald Trump's executive order offers no plan to reunite the thousands of children who remain separated from their parents. The Department of Health and Human Services confirmed that they simply had no plan or no plans to reunite these families. These little children, some merely infants, are suffering immeasurably, and they need to be reunited with their parents immediately, with no delay. And the executive order callously disregards this part of the crisis entirely. Now, luckily, I'll add that the executive order also doubles down on the administration's cruel and inhumane zero-tolerance policy. So this is the promise that they've made to criminally prosecute every single person that they can, every single person who crosses a border between formal border crossings, or people who are placed into deportation proceedings. Every one of these people is being detained. Every one of these people who they possibly can is being prosecuted. They should be using prosecutorial discretion, the same discretion that every prosecutor in every case, in every issue across the country that makes every day to determine who is a threat, who is not a threat, who should we prosecute, who should we not prosecute, who needs to be detained, who does not need to be detained, whose children need to be put in cages. Remember, in this particular instance, when they separated children from parents, when they caged children, they never made any determination whether these people were any threat to their children or any threat to society. It is a zero-tolerance policy. And by failing to utilize prosecutorial discretion in detaining and criminally charging people who are not dangerous, the administration has manufactured a crisis whereby children have one of two options. They either need to be removed from their parents, or they need to be put in a cage with their parents. And let me be clear that both of these alternatives are completely unacceptable and inhumane. Now, going back to Ms. L's story, I told you we got her reunited with her child, and the class action lawsuit continued. And we're continuing to fight the process in court. Late Tuesday night, we got great news. Judge Donna Sabra in the United States District Court for the Southern District of California issued an injunction in the case, which requires the government to return all of the children who have been stolen, all children who are under age 5 within 14 days, and all other children within 30 days. This is a huge victory, but we still recognize that these children have not yet been reunited with their families, and so justice is still nowhere near been achieved. However, the administration has signaled that it has to give these children back to the parents that it kidnapped them from. Yet it's going to indiscriminately detain every single person. They're not going to stop detentions. They're just going to put the children in the cages with their parents. We can't let the Trump administration create a second crisis right now. Children do not belong in cages. They don't belong in cages by themselves. They don't belong in cages with their parents. What have we become? What have we become? The one thing that I'll agree with the president on through this whole catastrophe that he has created is that we need leadership from Congress. We need Congress to take the authority away from the President of the United States that he has been using to abuse children and destroy families. And when I said that I stand here with some shame, I stand here with some shame that my own elected representatives have failed us. Our West Virginia congressional delegation has been either entirely supportive of the president, silent, or fully inactive in fighting these abuses. I think it's incumbent upon all of us to ensure that Representatives McKinley, Capito, and Manchin get on the right side of history. They represent us. West Virginians value family. We value family. And they need to know that we expect them to stand up for children, for families, and for immigrants. And they also need to know that we're watching them. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joseph. And now I'm going to introduce the Reverend Dr. Shauna Hyde, who is going to talk to us about the trauma that's affecting these children in this situation. Well, hello.
Thank you for having me come. It's seldom that a counselor gets a public forum to talk about trauma, because trauma is by nature a very heavy subject and a lot of people wish to avoid it. And a lot of people will minimize it and make little jokes. I was so traumatized when I couldn't find a parking spot, or they'll minimize people's reactions and say, oh, kids are just resilient, they'll be fine. And sometimes we can forget the bigger picture. So even though I'm thankful I get to talk about it, I'm also pretty upset that it has to be about this. That our country, a country that's known for how we care for children and how we really want families to be together, and we have failed to let that happen. So let's talk a little bit. How many of you as a kid was ever in the grocery store and you turned around and suddenly mom and dad or grandpa wasn't there anymore? Did you ever have that happen? How did you feel? Terrified? Anybody scared? Worried? Did you go, oh no, I've been left, they don't like me anymore? Will they forget me? Are they coming back? Did you have all those feelings? And you still remember that feeling today, don't you? It's still right there when you think about it. Now, as a parent, did you ever have that time when you were maybe at the state fair or at the mall and your kid was there 1 second and then dadgummit, the very next second, they were gone? And were you anxious? Did you turn into a screaming lunatic? Yes. And you fretted and you worried and you threatened everyone and everything, and you made all sorts of dire promises about what was going to happen when that kid finally got back to you, right? And that feeling is still there today too, isn't it? Yes. Deep emotional pain often comes from separation, especially when it is unexpected. So when we talk about trauma, we're talking about something that changes lives, not just for a minute, but for forever, for the rest of that life. And sometimes it can be so life impacting that it will change the life for the next generation as well. Because if you have a parent who's deeply traumatized, how they respond to everything as you grow up impacts you as well. So what is trauma? What makes that thing, that moment, be trauma? Well, believe it or not, it's not because you're weak. It's not because you're inept or unable or have no coping skills. It's not because you're just somehow stupid or unable. It is always something that made you feel completely, absolutely, utterly helpless and hopeless. That's why a 30-year veteran fire chief can suddenly one day experience trauma when he never has before. Something happened in which he realized he was completely, utterly helpless. There was nothing he could do. So let's think about that a minute. I'm a kid. I'm 8 years old. I only speak one language. Mom and Dad keep telling me things will be better when we get to America. We'll be there, we'll make a family, we'll have the American dream, we will succeed. Things will be better. And then suddenly, the very next instant, Mom and Dad are gone. I don't know where I am. I don't understand what's happening. I don't know who these people are. And I can't sleep, and I can't eat, and no one comes when I cry. And could you maybe begin to see and understand why there might be some trauma involved? Trauma goes deep. And whenever we experience a crisis, we react, don't we? If a bear walked through here, how many of you would scream? Maybe run? Your blood pressure would go up, your heart would start racing. All these things happen to prepare you to survive. Whenever someone has experienced a trauma, their body gets stuck in that reaction. It stays there. They can't turn it off. So eventually they have long-term high blood pressure problems. There was a study done years ago called Adverse Childhood Experiences that shows that when someone experiences a trauma as a child, they're far more likely to grow up to be someone who is incarcerated, struggles with mental health issues. Often they might struggle with substance addiction. They will be more likely to miss days of work. They will be more likely to have heart attacks and just not be that person in society that we think everyone should be. So, here are these families who have come for the American dream. And instead, they have experienced something that none of us would wish on our worst enemy. None of us like being in that place where we feel helpless or hopeless and we have no options available to us. And as I said, this is a deep and heavy subject. So I've tried not to give you too many details, too many things to fret about, too many things to worry about. But just for a minute, imagine being that kid, that one that was lost, or that parent who lost that child. And you don't know where they are, you don't know how they are, and you don't even know how to begin to find them. So it's very possible that we are inflicting trauma on people. And maybe it wasn't done intentionally. We don't know how all this came about. We can guess and look. Yeah, we can look back at laws and when movements and changes. But somewhere along the way, we forgot something. That children are our most precious commodity worldwide. To invest in them is to invest in our future. It's to change the world. So it is time to say, guys, let's put on our big boy pants and stop playing the blame game. And let's sit down at the table and let's fix this thing. Because in this country, when we have to separate families, one of the first things we do is everyone is sent to counseling. And usually we try not to separate families unless it's something that is really important. We know the trauma involved. Now hopefully if you do, you might want to write a little letter, make a phone call, or even just say a prayer tonight for that kid you don't know. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shonda. I'm going to invite our friend Janice Hill forward now to speak to the issue.
I don't know about you, but I care. Do you?
Yep.
Thank you. I'm going to start off because I am a pastor and because, to have a captive audience, but I also know it's hot. So for y'all that don't know this, and I'm not going to read the whole thing, but this is out of the Bible. When the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, then he will sit on the throne of his glory. I have no idea what that means. Okay, I'm just telling you. Okay, all the nations, not Christians, not Americans, not Africans, not Hispanics, all the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate one from another as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. And he will put the sheep on his right hand and the goats at his left. Then the king will say to those at his right hand, "Come, you that are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world." Again, I'm not sure what that means. Now listen, this is the part. For I was hungry, and you gave me, y'all know this. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to, I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you gave me clothing. I was sick, and you took care of me. I was in prison, and you visited me. Then the righteous will answer him, Lord, when was it that we saw you hungry and gave you food, or thirsty and gave you something to drink? And when was it that we saw you a stranger and welcomed you, or naked and gave you clothing? And when was it that we saw you sick or in prison and visited you? And the king will answer them. And I do know what this means. Truly I tell you, just as you did it to one of the least of these, you did it to me. Now we could do the reverse. The people on the left hand, the goats, and they get in trouble because they didn't. And they said, when did we not? When you didn't do it to the least of these. Okay. Now, you have been aware of what's going on. I don't need to tell you. That's been done beautifully by our two first speakers. So I thought I would do something a little different. I want to tell you what you need to do for this crisis, and for, I don't know, it's been 5 minutes. I don't know what new crisis has happened, but I'm sure there's one. But I titled this, Get on the Bus. Some of you know exactly what I mean by that. Because if you're ever asked to do something, what should they say, Jean?
Yes.
Yes. If you're asked to do something, what do you say?
Yes.
Yes. You don't have to understand everything that they're talking about. You don't have to understand all the legalese and everything. You know morally what's right and what's wrong. So you need to say yes. Now, also another thing that you need to do is you need to associate with the right people. Because, see, you can get asked to do a lot of things. And you need to look at who's doing the ask. I was asked to get on a bus a year ago on West Virginia Day. I wasn't sure exactly what it was, but because I'm a veteran and a pastor, they really wanted me to go because I represent two different factions. So I got on this bus to Washington, D.C., not totally understanding, except I knew we were fighting for the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act. Very personally, my daughter is alive because of that. So I said yes. And because the right people asked me to do it, I went. Now we get to Washington, D.C., and again, there was some mix-up about if we were going to get to meet with all of them, and then there were some things afterwards that you know, they'll put a microphone in your face and you start talking and you have no idea where that's going. And finally, we got in to see Senator Capito. And she walked in, and after a few opening remarks, it just hit me. These are not numbers we're talking about. I mean, these are millions of people that would be affected, but I wanted her to have a face to go along with this horrendous action that they were taking. So I walked up to her and I showed her a picture of my daughter before cancer. And I'm telling you, she's a pretty gal. Doesn't look, because I said that day, doesn't look like her mother, but she is a beautiful, they kind of giggled when I said that. Y'all aren't a good audience. But anyway, she's a beautiful girl. Then I showed her a picture of while she was in treatment. I can hardly look at it. She's almost in a fetal position, no hair, in the hospital receiving horrible chemotherapy that is keeping her alive. July 3rd is 5 years since she got the diagnosis. She's still being kept alive because of one chemotherapy and the one you know about, Keytruda, which is the immunotherapy. At 7 months, she reached $1.3 million in health care. She's been on 5 years. I can't even imagine. She makes a good salary. But not to belabor that, I said what I had to say, and then I sat down, and some other people said some awesome things, and I felt like she listened to us. Remember I told you to associate with the right people? Well, here I was, and the next day, I believe it was, Jean called me or texted me and said, do you mind if we post the video? And I said, what video? I had no idea. And she said, the video of you talking to Senator Capito. I didn't know there was a video, but Mark Dasher had his iPhone and he videoed it. I had no idea. Then it went viral. There were thousands of people. And thousands of people. Do you know how many people looked at that? 7.1 million people. To this day, I can't believe it. I cannot believe it. I didn't get on that bus thinking, oh, everybody's going to see my video. Absolutely not. I didn't hardly know what I was doing. I didn't know I was going to be videoed, and I didn't know it was going to be posted, and I certainly didn't know it was going to go viral. Now, I would like to say with that much attention that it made a difference. I don't know that it did. It may have postponed it, but they're still trying to get rid of it. Now, that's a real personal thing of me, and there are other people here that have very eloquently given their stories also. Kim Kramer's one. Her letter to Manchin was read on the Senate floor for everybody. Yes. Oh, stop hiding. So, my point is, who were the people that did that? It wasn't me. It was people that I surrounded myself with, that I loved, that I trusted, and that cared about me. You never know. So, I want you to look for opportunities to be vocal. Look for them. Listen, don't ask me to speak unless you want me to, because I'll say yes. Any opportunity I get, because I believe so strongly. Now, we could probably talk about 15 things that we're incensed about. But we're really focusing on something. Did you ever in a trillion years ever think that we would be dealing with what we're dealing with the children? Never. The next thing I want to say is that you need to be passionate. You know, this is not a time to, be kind of quiet. We need to be passionate about this, folks. You've heard what happens to kids and families. I remember not knowing where my daughter was for 45 seconds, and it was the worst 45 seconds of my life. Terrified. One man turned around, his little boy was gone, and if you remember the story, they found him later. He was decapitated. It happens that quickly, and that traumatizes me. Can you imagine what these kids are going through? So be passionate. And then I want to tell you to be prepared. Listen, if you go to a rally, I promise you do not know if someone's going to stick a microphone in your face. I promise you it can happen. Some of you know that, right? Because it's happened to you. And you could be an internet phenomenon. You never know. So be prepared. And let me tell you something. If you don't know me, you're going to think, what an egotistical person she is. I am not. But I taught public speaking at the college level for over 25 years. I promise you, you give me an hour and I can help you know what to say and how to say it if somebody sticks a microphone in your mouth. And I don't charge much. Okay? But I'm really serious about that. If someone asks you something that you know nothing about, I don't know anything about it. But if they're asking you, you probably have some information that you can give them. So you need to be prepared. Now, I've got two more things. How many of you seen those bracelets, WWJD? You seen them? If you've got one on, I'm just going to tell you, I hate those. I hate them. What would Jesus do? Let me tell you, I have found that whatever you believe is what you think Jesus would do. Jesus would stand up and Jesus would tell us to obey the laws of the land. Bull. Jesus would tell us that we need to have pride in our nation and be nationalistic and be the greatest and be the biggest bully. Bull. So don't tell me WWJD. Let me tell you, WDJD. You know what that stands for? What did Jesus do? You see, that's different. I'd love to. That might be a new business, Gene. Kim, we might. WDJD. What did Jesus do? Jesus accepted people. Jesus loved people. Jesus was the friend of the ones that are being made fun of. Didn't you lose it when he first did that? That I was done then. Oh my gosh. So what did Jesus do? We can look at that and see. Now, I continue to be surrounded by people who I am in awe of. Jean has talked me down from some of the stupidest things that I was going to do. Well, and she's very kind. And she said, well, you know, let's think about this. I'm going to stop eating. I'm going to go on a hunger strike. Okay, well, let's talk about that. I'm going to walk to Charleston. I had my shoes ready. I was dressed, ready to go. Surround yourself with people that know your heart and you know their heart, but that are wiser than you. See, I don't know how to do a lot of resisting. I'm new at this. I love my new title of activist. I love that. And I'm learning. And I also know good stuff when I see it. And are y'all getting bitten by these flies? She didn't get flies. She said I was keeping them off of her. And I kept going, go to her. But I also recognized, and you may have seen this, Cammie Murray posted this on Facebook. And I'm going to tell you, I just hope I can get through it. I can, because I've read it so many times. It's about Worcestershire. I don't know who Worcestershire is, but I'm a fan. It's called Home. No one leaves home unless home is the mouth of a shark. You only run for the border when you see the whole city running as well. Your neighbor's running faster than you. The boy you went to school with who kissed you dizzy behind the old tin factory is holding a gun bigger than his body. You only leave home when home won't let you stay. No one else would leave home unless home chased you. Fire under feet, hot blood in your belly. It's not something you ever thought about doing. So when you did, you carried the anthem under your breath, waiting until the airport toilet to tear up the passport and swallow each mouthful of paper, making it clear that you would not be going back. You have to understand, no one puts their children in a boat unless the water is safer than the land? Who would choose to spend days and nights in the stomach of a truck unless the miles traveled meant something more than journey? No one would choose to crawl under fences, be beaten until your shadow leaves you, raped, then drowned, forced to the bottom of the boat because you are darker, be sold, starved, shot at the border like a sick animal, be pitied, lose your name, lose your family, make a refugee camp a home for a year or 2 or 10. Stripped and searched, find prison everywhere, and if you survive and you are greeted on the other side with go-home blacks, refugees, dirty immigrants, asylum seekers, sucking our country dry of milk, dark, with their hands out, smell strange, savage. Look what they've done to their own countries. What will they do to ours? The dirty looks in the streets, softer than a limb torn off. The indignity of everyday life, more tender than 14 men who look like your father between your legs. Insults easier to swallow than rubble, than your child's body in pieces. For now, forget about pride. Your survival is most important. I want to go home, but home is the mouth of a shark. Home is the barrel of the gun, and no one would leave home unless home chased you to the shore, unless home tells you to leave what you could not behind, even if it was human. No one leaves home until home is a damp voice in your ear saying, leave. Run now. I don't know what I've become, but I know that anywhere is safer than here.
Thank you, Janice. And I only have those moments of wisdom rarely, so I'm glad that I've been there for you.
I may have used them all up.
Thank you so much. And I'd like to introduce you to Kendra Frechey, who will be our next congressperson. Vote for Frechey.
Thank you. We've heard from a lot of people today who have a lot of wisdom, and they talk to you about some values and some principles. We've heard about legal principles. We've heard about religious values. We've heard about scientific principles and what's happening with children at our borders who are separated from their parents. What I'd like to talk to you about is American values and what it means to be American. Our American values were founded on this notion of freedom and bravery and patriotism and taking a stand for what's right and building together to create a new nation. That's who we are. Our roots are deep, and we're still growing. And we're building on that notion of freedom and bravery and patriotism. But we've stumbled a little bit. And one thing that I know, even though I am upset, that's not even the right word, pained by what's happening at our borders, is that I know something else about Americans, and that's we fix things when they're wrong. And the way that we do that is exactly what we're doing right now. We're raising our voices. We're telling people that this isn't right, and we have the right to do that. We have the First Amendment because our founders understood that the way you fix problems is you let people talk about them, even if you disagree with what they're saying. So we're coming together to make sure that our voices are heard. And we are on the precipice of change. We're unhappy with how things are going in the country right now, a lot of us. I think a lot of people can agree with that regardless of your political party. We're unhappy with how we're being represented. We're unhappy with what we see as our American values. So we need to get back to the understanding that to live free, we need to support our communities. To be brave, we need to welcome new people. To be patriotic, we need to love each other. And we're not doing all of those things right now, and we could be doing better. And the way that we do that, the way that we fix these problems is that we don't just talk to each other, we talk to new people, and we find out where we agree. And the way we change our electorate is that we get people to vote who aren't voting. This isn't about just talking to the same people we've been talking to and getting the same people to the polls who've been voting. This is why the polls are wrong. When they call around and find out who you're going to vote for. They can't predict who's going to win anymore. You know what else can't predict who's going to win anymore? Money. We're seeing it over and over again throughout the country where the candidate with the lesser amount of money is winning. I'm one of them. And that gives me hope that what we're doing is we're starting to pay attention to what matters. And we're getting people to the polls who didn't used to pay attention to what matters, but they are now. So here's our chance. Here's where we can make change. We can change back to our values. We can focus on our American values and define what those are. Healthy people, healthy communities, strong schools, stable infrastructure, a strong populace, people who are able to engage in their community because they are healthy and educated and employed. That's why I'm running for Congress. That's why I'm standing before you today. And we all know we can do better. And that's why we're here. So thank you for being here. I'm proud to be here to speak to you tonight. And let's get out of the heat.
Thank you all so very much for being here. Thank you, Kendra, for sharing with us. Listen, I know you got some information at the table when you came in. We have phone numbers on there for Manchin, for Capito, and for McKinley. Blow their phones up. Demand that they make the changes that need to happen. Demand they reunite these families now and not in detention centers either. Demand that they stop incarcerating people for coming to our country and trying to get a better life and to leave insecurity and unsafe conditions behind them. Do what you can. Raise your voices. What's that?
That we created.
Yeah, it's a crisis that...
All the stuff that we did in Central America has helped create the crisis.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Our country destabilized an entire region and then we wonder why they want to come here. You're absolutely correct. But do something. Pick up the phone, make the call, send the email, take some action because it does make a difference. Each of us makes a difference as a citizen. Thank you so much for being here and being engaged. We appreciate it.